other things.
还有
On
另
your
外一件
desk,
事，
you should have a paper copy of the student collaboration.
你们应该桌上有讲义，
And you should also have a paper copy of the teacher guide.
那同时还有一个讲师的守则。
All right, for today's lesson,
那今天的课程呢，
you will be learning some material,
你们将会学到的有关一些材料，
analyzing the information you get,
然后分析你们得到的资讯，
creating a model,
然后制造一个模型，
testing the model,
然后拿这个模型来做试验，
and then discussing and analyzing the results.
然后互相讨论检讨你们得出来的数据。
Okay, so the lesson is called Construct a Model of an Energy Efficient Home.
那今天主题就是我们要制造一个节能的家庭的模型。
You're going to notice that on my notes up here, it will either have a green background
那我的幻灯片上面如果有绿色背景的话呢，
or a white background that says teacher note.
那白色的背景就表示是老师的这个笔记背景。
So I created this for teachers,
那我是特别为了老师来制作这一套幻灯片，
and any of the slides that have the green background,
所以只要是绿色背景的幻灯片
you can use with your students.
是放给学生看的，
Anything with the white background
那白色背景的幻灯片呢，
is information I'm just going to be discussing with you today.
就是我要跟你讨论的内容。
Okay, so for this lesson,
那这一堂课呢，
it's a skill-based approach,
是一个技能，必须要用到你的技能来做的。
and I have learning objectives for the students.
那这边有几个学习的要点。
Today, you will be the students,
那今天大家都是学生，
and the teaching assistants
那助教呢
will be your guide, your helper, and also your teacher.
会是来帮忙你的人，同时也是你的老师，
So they will have some teaching roles today.
所以他们今天要担任老师的这个职位。
All right, so student objectives, I typically write up on the board.
那我会把学生这些重点放在上面，
So students understand what I expect of them from the lesson.
那学生会了解说我要求他们做到。
So for today, this is my expectations of you.
那今天呢，我希望大家能够做到以下。
The first one is to design and build an energy efficient home on a small scale.
那今天就是要做一个小就是比例上比较小的节能的这个家庭或者建物。
The second objective is to determine the appropriate materials and techniques that you're going to use to build the home.
然后就是大家要讨论怎么用什么样的材料以及什么样的方法来做这个东西。
The third objective is to think about and apply engineering principles.
然后大家要想说是要用什么样的工程的原则来制造这个。
The fourth objective is you have to stick to the budget you're given today.
那另外一个就是大家一定要注意到我们给你的这个预算。
And that means you'll have to purchase the materials with the money that you're going to get.
所以意思也就是说你要用钱来买这个材料。
So you won't be able to use all the materials that are displayed today.
所以你不能够用这边所有的东西。
So there is a lot of choice involved.
所以你必须要选择。
Not everyone will get the same budget.
那不是每个人都有同样的金钱项目。
So that means you will experience economic inequity.
所以大家会感受到这个经济上面的不平等，或者
And
经济上面的缺乏。
At the end of the day, we're going to reflect and discuss on those inequities.
然后今天结束的时候呢，我们会大家来讨论这个议题，
Because that's real life.
因为真实的世界就是这样。
Not everyone has the same budget or the same job or makes the same amount of money.
不是每个人都是做同样的事情，拿到同样的薪水。
Okay, so why do I teach this way?
那为什么我要教这个呢？
When I first started teaching,
我刚开始教学的时候，
I was told to get students to remember and understand all the material for a test.
那我被告知的是，我要让学生记住以及了解我教他们的内容。
I am now asked
然后我现在要求呢，
to get students to apply their knowledge,
让学生能够运用他们学到的东西，
analyze their knowledge,
然后分析他们得到的知识，
evaluate what they know,
然后来评估他们所知道的内容，
and make a unique creation.
然后创造一个独特的东西。
So, when I first started teaching, I had students recalling facts,
所以我刚开始教学的时候，我要求学生背诵他们知道的事实，
defining topics and terms,
然后用他们用东西来形容说他们这个是什么意思。
writing lists and describing and discussing what they know.
写一个清单，然后来解释说他们学到什么东西。
We're asking now our students to apply higher level thinking.
那我现在要求我的学生呢，做比较高阶的思考，
At younger levels.
然后也就是说，他们在低阶比较低的学习程度的时候就开始做这个，
Not just high school and university level.
不是只有在高中或者是大学这个阶段。
Okay, so this is also a teacher note. So
这是给教师用的。
this isn't something you would share with your students. I'm just sharing this with you.
那也就是你会跟你的学生来分享这些东西，然后这样也就是我现在要跟你们分享。
We're also asked by our administrators to create what's called essential questions.
同时，这也是我们所谓的重要的主要的议题。
These are open-ended questions that are not answered with a yes or a no.
这个问题不是简单就可以用是或不是来。
And that also creates higher level thinking.
那同时，这也会激荡大家有一个比较高阶的思考。
So requirements of these type of questions for a lesson.
那这些需求，这些问题的需求，
It's my job as a teacher
是我身为老师的工作，
to get students to stimulate thinking and inquiry,
是让学生能够激荡他们的想法以及他们的好奇心。
create questions that are arguable,
想出学生需要反驳或者辩解的这个问题。
which means they don't have one right answer.
也就是说，他们没有一个正确的答案。
I also want them to raise other questions
同时，我让他们提出其他不同的问题，
that will create discussion and debate.
会让他们能够互相讨论以及辩论。
I'll also ask them further evidence
然后我会向学生要求说，你们能提供更多的证据，
and the reason behind why they gave me those answers.
还有为什么你要给我这些东西的原因。
And the questions should have the big ideas or the issues that we're going to discuss in class.
那这些都应该会指向有一个大的就是目前大家感受到的问题。
So my questions for the lesson for you,
那我对你们的问题呢，就是
how do you create a model of an energy efficient home?
你要怎么样来制造一个这个节能的这个建物的模型？
There are 18 different groups in here,
这边有18组，
and there will be 18 different designs.
所以会有18个不同的设计。
Number 2, what materials are used to keep a building cool?
第二题就是你要用什么材料才能够让一个建物保持冷却？
Where I live,
那我住的地方呢？
we're not interested in keeping a building cool, we're interested in keeping a building warm.
我们担心的事情是怎么样让我们的家很暖和，而不是怎么样让我们的家很冷。
But for today's lesson, because it's going to be 95 degrees
那
Fahrenheit,
OK， 他说因为今天是外面是95度华氏，那但是摄氏是多少？31度。
35 Celsius, 34 Celsius.
所以摄氏就35度左右。
Sorry, metric.
因为美国是用那个英制，所以是化石。
So you're going to need to create a building that's going to stay cool
所
today.
以大家今天要做的就是怎么样制造出一个建物，然后能够保持冷。
And what construction techniques did you use to create your model?
那还有就是你要用什么样的建造方法来制作你的这个模型。
So just like in my classroom, I won't get the same answers for every group.
那就像在我的课程里面，我永远不会得到同样的答案。
Okay, so typically during the lesson,
那通常呢，在课程里面，
I will introduce the lesson to students, use some anticipatory set, and then set to engage my students in the lesson.
那通常我会用一个就是期待的方法来让我的学生对这个项目有兴趣。
I will have the objectives written up on the board.
就像刚刚一样，我会把我要求他们的项目写在上面。
And those were the lessons for today.
就是我刚刚的幻灯片上面这几点。
And give them an overview. So I will explain what I want at the end.
所以我会告诉我的学生，最后我会期待得到他们什么样的成果。
And my job as a teacher is to get them there.
那我身为一个教师，我的工作就是让他们能够达到他们的目的，或者到达终点。
Okay, so our agenda for today, what we're going to get through.
那今天我们要做的呢，就是
You will explore some basic concepts of construction and insulation.
那你会探讨一些建筑的方式，以及如何去隔热。
And so from now on, I'm going to consider you my students.
那现在我是把各位当成学生。
So anytime you see students, I'm referring to you.
那只要我说学生的话，也就是指你们。
So individual students, I will ask you to sketch a prototype.
那我会要求每一位学生呢，用笔画出一个这个原型。
Then you're going to be grouped, and you're at a table of 3. That's going to be your group for today.
那各位是每一个桌子都有3位，三位就是成为一个小组。
You will collaborate and discuss on the best design.
你们互相来讨论，讨论出你们最好的设计。
And the best design, I don't mean you vote for the best one.
我说最好的设计，不是说你们投票说谁的设计最好。
The best design, I mean you take the best elements of the 3 people from your group.
而是说从每一个人最好的建议拿出来之后做出来的这个设计。
You will also be assigned a budget and purchase materials from the side.
同时，你们每一组都会有一个预算，而且你们要用这个预算来买你们的材料。
You will assemble or construct the home.
你们会一起来建造这个模型。
You will test your prototype of that model.
然后你们会来再用你们做出来的东西来做实验。
And if you don't pass that test,
如果你们这个测试没有通过的话，
you may need to redesign your home.
你必须要重新设计你们的这个节能屋的设计。
If you do pass all of the tests,
如果你这个测试过了的话，
we have other activities
我们有其他的活动。
for the model of your home.
也就是说，你们做出来这个节能屋的设计，我们还有其他的活动让你们继续做下去。
So that means right now you have to keep in the back of your mind
所以也就是说，你们要有这个准备。
what materials you would use to pass these tests.
那你们要用什么样的材料才能够通过这个测试？
So the tests include a typhoon wind,
所以这个测试包括你的做出来的模型必须要能够抵挡台风的风，
an earthquake test,
还有地震，
and a flooding
还有
test.
淹水。
So think about the materials you're going to use if you expect to get to that level.
所以想一想，大家好好想一想，我们要用什么样的材料才能够通过这些测试？
At the very end, we're going to debrief
那
with all the students in the groups,
最后呢，我们要跟大家一起来讨论成果，
and then we'll debrief in the class.
然后我们整个课堂一起做这个。
This is an excellent lesson, and typically it's taught over a few days,
那通常我们这个课程是好几天的课程，
but it's also, it can be interdisciplinary with math and STEM and writing classes, English.
那同样的教学方法也可以用在
Language class.
这个，比如说数学的课程写作的课程，或者是语言的课程。
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to explore.
所以我要大家去探讨，
So you're exploring how you're going to design
你们要
and use materials.
开始讨论说怎么样去做这个设计，以及要用什么样的材料。
And in New York State,
在纽约州，
there are a new set of science standards that we are using.
我们有一个新的在科学上面的这个标准，
And we want students to do the science
然后我们会要求学生来做这个实验，科
in
学的实验，
in order to find the answers
去找出它的答案，
and not just give them the
而
answers.
不是只是把答案给你们。
Okay, so next I'm going to show you some background information which you can use with your students.
那这些是一些背景资料，你可以跟你的学生们分享。
So the following slides will contain some information about basic concepts, knowledge, and information.
那接下来几张幻灯片呢，会有一些概念能够帮助你的学生来了解。
That your students would have to have a basic understanding of before they construct the home.
对，就是说你们的学生必须要有一些基础的了解，才能够继续这个课程。
So the following slides will have a green background, which you can use as a teacher.
所以接下来的幻灯片都是绿色背景的，也就是说你们可以放给你的学生看。
With the next generation science standards that we use in New York State,
那我们用这个 NGSS 这个标准呢，在纽约州教学生的时候，
we ask the students to find this information on their own.
我们要求学生用自我的力量来找出这些东西的答案。
But for time, I'm going to go through all the concepts.
那因为时间，今天时间上呢，我会带领大家走这个过程。
Okay, so one concept or term that students will need to understand is radiation.
那第一个学生要了解的就是辐射。
So thermal energy or thermal radiation just means particles are randomly moving, and the faster they move, the greater the thermal energy or heat.
基本上也就是粒子振动的越快，它的热度就越高的。好，
So the sun is an example of radiation.
太阳就是一个辐射的例子。
Another term students will need to know is the concept of conduction.
那另外一个学生要了解的是传导。
So that's a transfer of heat because of collisions of molecules and atoms.
那这个传导的方式就是原子粒子它们在互相振动之下。
One important concept of this
那一个很重要的原理是，
is that heat flows from higher to lower kinetic energy.
那这个热能是从比较高温到低温来这样传导。
So kinetic energy is moving energy, and the faster things move, the faster or the greater the temperature.
那粒子运动的越快，温度就会越高。
When things slow down, temperatures will slow down.
那粒子开始慢下来，温度就会慢下来，就会降下来。
You will explain to your students, or they'll have to know the concept of convection.
同学也要了解对流。
And that's when a fluid like air or liquid,
那比如说水或者是空气，
that heat travels away from the source.
那这个也就是这个热能经过这个对流来传导。
And as it does that, it carries that thermal energy away.
那这样子的话，它就把这个热能能够传递下去。
So warmer things tend to expand and rise,
那热的东西比较容易膨胀跟上升，
and cooler things tend to contract and come together
那
and then sink.
冷的东西比较容易收缩而且下降。
And again, that can happen with air or a liquid.
那比如说水啊，流体或者是气体。
Students should also be familiar with climate zones.
那学生也必须了解这个气候的区域。
So warmer regions in the middle of the earth, cooler regions on the poles.
比较热的区域比较靠近赤道，那比较冷的靠近两极。
That's where I live,
这就是我住的地方，
near the Great Lakes.
在那个五大湖那边。
And you live in a warmer region.
大家是住在比较炎热的地方。
So there are actually climate zones in Taiwan.
那台湾也有不同的气候区域。
So if you were to build a house, you would have to think where you're building your house in Taiwan.
所以当你盖你的房子的时候，你也要考虑说你要在台湾的哪里盖这个房子。
Is it at the bottom of the island where it's more tropical,
我要盖在南边这个比较炎热的地方呢，
or more subtropical
还
regions
是比较北边没有那么热？
in a city or suburb,
你要盖在城市里，还是要盖在郊区，
or near the coastline?
还是盖在海边？
Most energy efficient homes have some basic elements in common.
那绝大部分这个节能的家庭呢，有几项基本的元素，
So this is how you should be constructing your home.
所以你应该就是了解这些内容。
It can be well constructed with some controlled ventilation.
比如说你要有一些能够控制的
And I have this here, a tightly sealed thermal envelope. You would not have that here, but we would have that at home because we live in such a cold region.
那基本上也就是说，你要让你的家里面能够绝缘，跟外面的气温能够绝缘，因为他们住的地方比较冷，所以这个对他们很重要。
So my parents have a home that has a tightly sealed thermal envelope.
那我父母住的房子就是有一个非常好的绝缘体，他们就住在这个绝缘体里面。
Which means no air gets in or escapes.
所以也就是说，没有空气可以进来，也没有空气可以出去，
So they have to have really good ventilation.
所以他们必须要有很好的通风设备。
The home has to be properly sized.
那这个家的大小也要必须要刚刚好。
And have high efficiency, for this topic for today, cooling systems.
那我的父母需要效率非常好的这个加热的暖气，但是因为我们今天的课程的关系，这里我们需要很好的冷气。
Also in a home, you're looking for energy efficient doors, windows, and appliances.
同时，我们需要有气密窗、气密门来保护我们的这个节能的目的。
Okay, so you're not just designing a home, you're designing a home that someone's going to want to live in it.
你不只是设计随便一个家，而是你要设计一个家是有人要住在的。
So you want to think about comfort.
所以你要想说舒适，
You want to have a consistent temperature.
所以住在这里面的气温要能够保持稳定。
And that's one of the tests we're doing for today.
所以这是我们要做的测试其中之一。
And just like in your own home, you'd want it to be quiet and tranquil.
就像你自己的家里面，你说这个家里面很安静，
Have excellent indoor air quality.
那在家里的空气品质要很好，
Be energy efficient so you're not spending a lot of money on energy bills.
那能够非常有效率的使用能源，所以你能源的这个账单不会太高。
Be pretty resilient because if you lost power, you don't want your home to get too warm.
那同时要能够保护你的家庭，假设说今天停电的话，你的温度不会马上升高，
But you also want to be environmentally responsible
但同时你要环保，
and reduce energy demands.
那减少你对能源的需求。
Okay, so designing a home in a warmer region, you want to consider the climate and be responsive to the weather conditions you will get.
那如果今天你是在一个比较热的地方来盖你的房子，你必须要了解你这一个区域的气候，同时你要考虑气候的这个因素。
So today, when you test, I'm going to have you consider the orientation of your home.
所以你今天制造的模型必须要考虑这个房子的面向。
You should also consider solar shading and passive ventilation.
那你要考虑到日照如何可以就是在有地硬的地方，同时要有好的这个换气系统。
Where you place your windows and doors.
也就是说，你要怎么样开你的门或者窗？
The materials you need to construct the walls and the roof.
那你要用什么来作为你的屋顶以及你的墙壁的材料？
And as an extension activity with your students, maybe make it aesthetically pleasing look.
那同时，那一个加分的就是你也许要让你设计出来的房子很漂亮，很好看。
And incorporate outdoor spaces.
然后跟外面的景物可以和谐的相处共处。
Okay, so most of Taiwan is considered subtropical, but the bottom of the island is considered tropical.
那台湾大部分的台湾是考虑是所谓亚热带。好，然后那台湾南部的话是所谓的热带。
So we're going to be looking at, again, site orientation, sun and shading, ventilation, and materials.
所以我们必须要考虑，就是我们这个房子的坐向是怎么样，然后我们要考虑到说太阳照射的这个程度，还有我们的通风是怎么样设计，还有我们要用的材料是什么。
And also how you design your roof.
还有你们怎么样设计你的屋顶。
And then we can talk a little bit about the exterior spaces and water and energy efficiency.
还有就是外面的景物，还有水，还有怎么样让我们这个能源的使用可以非常的有效率。
Okay, so when you're testing your home,
那当我们做这个模型的测试的时候，
placement of your home is very important depending on where the sun rises and sets.
那房子的坐向跟太阳的升跟落有很大的关系。
Long sides of the home
如果这个房子的宽面，
will have a lot of heat inside.
那有很多的热能的话，
Shorter sides of the home won't have as much heat inside the home.
如果是用窄面的房子的窄面照射太阳的话，那它就不会像用宽面这样这么热。
And that's just because of the area and the sun that hits the area of your home.
因为这个太阳照射的面积的关系。
For shading of your home, think about the overhang of a roof
那地硬的话呢，就要看你们屋顶的突出的程度，
and providing shading for the walls of your home.
也就是你这些屋顶可以保护你的墙壁不被太阳照射。
And if you really were building a home outside, you might want to think about like planting trees for shade.
如果你盖一个房子在外面的话，你可能可以考虑就是说用树来帮助做这个地硬。
For ventilation, when you're building your home,
那通风，当你盖屋子的时候，你要考虑通风。
you might want to think about cross ventilation, so having windows and doors across from each other.
所以你可能要考虑对流的问题，所以这个门跟窗要在相反的墙面。
And we also talked about convection, so hot air rises.
那还有就是这个对流的问题，
So you want a place where the heat's going to be able to escape
所
your
以你
home.
必须要考虑说这个热气要从哪里排出去。
The walls or materials or construction of your home.
那还有就是这个你制造墙壁的材料，
Thicker walls
比较厚的墙，
will have what's called thermal massing.
那它会有这个
It holds in heat,
OK 比较厚的墙，它可以保存这个热气，
which means it will release that heat at night.
所以
So it heats up your home.
晚上的时候它保持的这个热气就可以排放出来。
If you construct your home with lightweight materials,
那如果你用比较轻质的东西来做你的墙壁的话，
they often cool really quickly, and at night your home won't be as hot.
它晚上的时候冷却的就会比较快，同时晚上就不会那么炎热。
Think of a way that you want to release the trapped hot air.
同时大家要想说，你要怎么样把热气排出去？
So maybe having an opening between your walls and your roof for that hot air to escape.
也许在靠近屋顶的地方，在你的墙上要有通风的设备，让这些热气能够排掉。
And why that's important is because you're going to be tested and given a heat lamp on your model, and that heat has to escape somehow.
那因为我们的测试就是拿一个加热灯放在你的模型上面，然后看你这个热气你要怎么样排出去。
And then you can also think about exterior spaces of your home, planting trees, shrubs, flowers, make it aesthetically pleasing to the eye.
同时你要考虑在你的这个房子的外面，你要是不是要种一些花草树啊，让看起来很舒服。
And it also adds shading and cools your home.
那同时也可以提供这个庇荫，让你的房子不会被晒到。
And then lastly, we won't get this today, but if you have solar panels, you can create electricity for lights and hot water.
那如果我们使用太阳能板的话呢，我们可以为这个家提供电能，有灯，也同时也可以有热水。
And you can also install plate fans or energy efficient appliances in your home.
同时，你也可以在家里面装这个电风扇以及节能的这个电器。
But again, we're only constructing a model today, so we won't be doing that.
那因为我们今天只是做模型，所以我们今天不会接触到这两样。
The last thing, collecting and storing rainwater for your plants or your garden.
那还有另外一个就是怎么样能够储水，就是这个下雨的水能够储存起来，让这个水可以用来做浇花。
It's often done using roof construction and materials.
那通常这是经过这个房屋顶的设计来做到这一点。
So there are a lot of things involved in designing a home that you're going to need to know for today.
所以当你设计这个屋子的时候，你必须要考虑很多项的问题。
So if you were using real materials for the home,
如果你是用真正的材料来建造你的房子的话，
the materials you would construct would have an R value.
那你使用的材料会有一个 R 的这个价值。
And the R value is how well that material insulates the material's resistance to heat flow.
这个 R 价值基本上就是这个材料能够遮蔽多少的这个热能。
So where I live, I'm really concerned with R values for materials.
那我住的地方，我必须要很注意这个 R 价值。
The greater the R value, the greater the insulating effectiveness, and that's what I want in a home.
这个 R 价值越高呢，那对我屋子的保温就会越好。
So how to calculate an R value just depends on its insulation, its thickness, and its density.
那 R value 的来源就是要看它对保温隔热的程度，它的厚度，还有它的密度。
So in Taiwan, you would be a zone 1 or a zone 2.
那台湾的话，我们必须要用第一区跟第二区。
So these R values are a little bit lower than where I would live, and I would be concerned with higher R values.
那台湾的 R 价值呢，很明显的比我需要的价值要低很多。
Okay, another thing, heat bridges.
另外一个就是热桥。
Okay, so a heat bridge is a high conducting material that allows heat to travel from one zone to another.
那热桥就是说，怎么样能够做出一个传导的物质，让热能可以从高温的地方到低温的地方。
And it reduces the effectiveness of R values.
那这样子的话，会降低这个 R value 的效能。
So when you're constructing your home, you have to be careful about what materials touch each other.
所以当你制作你的家的时候呢，你必须要很小心的知道说，这个材料碰到另外一个材料会有什么反应。
So where I live in a colder climate, heat tends to leave my home.
那因为我住的地方比较冷，所以热气比较容易从我们的家里面跑出去。
And in a warmer climate like right here, you're concerned about heating up your home too hot, so you don't want that.
那住在比较炎热的地方，譬如说台湾，那我们就必须要小心说怎么样 我这个热气很容易跑到我们家里。
So this kind of acts like a thermal bridge.
那这个呢，就是一个热桥的。
I have cold water,
我这边有冷水，
and you could do this demonstration with your students.
那你可以对你的学生做同样的实验。
And I also have very warm water.
然后这边我有热水，
I have a piece of copper,
这是一片铜片，
which is malleable, bendable. Yep.
所以它是非常能够，它柔软性。
And this will act as a thermal bridge.
那这个就是我们的热桥。
So if I put that in the
我
waters,
把这个放到水里面去之后呢，
heat will flow from warmer to cooler.
那热能会从热的地方跑到冷的地方，
And eventually this piece of copper gets warm.
然后最后呢，这个铜片会开始变热。
So it's a good visual demonstration. Students can come up and touch it and see how warm it
所
gets.
以这个展示可以让学生可以自己上来实际上摸这个铜片来了解这个发热的状况。
So I found a manufacturing company in Tainan,
我在台南找到一家工厂，
and they produce a material that has very low value,
他们制造出来的材料呢有非常低的 R 价值，
which is what you would want.
就是你们需要的材料。
I have some references up here that I used. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
各位有问题吗？听到这里，各位有什么问题吗？
Okay.
我知道翻译的很好，不好意思。
If you redesign it, yes. When we get to it, yes. So I have a question up here. She asked about, she's already thinking way ahead. What happens if I fail the testing of the heat and I redesign it?
那刚刚有同学提问，就是说，如果说我做出来的设计没有通过测试，那这个要怎么样来重新设计？
Which is an excellent question.
好，非常好的问题。
What happens to my budget?
那我的预算怎么办？
So the budget you're given
所以你拿到的这个预算呢，
is the only amount of money you have for the entire day.
也就是你唯一的预算，你就是这么多，你就只有这么多。
If you fail, you're not getting any more money.
你如果失败的话，你不会增加你的款项。
So you might want to tend to be conservative,
所以你可能要保守一点。
just in case you fail.
为这个假设说你没有通过测试的话，要自己要保留一些。
And you need to purchase more materials.
万一你还要买更多的东西。
That's a good question.
非常好的问题。
Okay, so up here, I have, sorry, a question, yeah?
Can we merge group and build a huge house or something like that?
That's a great question, but the answer is no.
那他的问题就是我们能不能把几个小组放在一起啊，然后盖一个比较大的房子？但是不行。
And you'll understand because there's design constraints that you have to follow.
不
So,
行，
yes,
因
so
为
that's a good question.
我们在设计上面有限制，所以不能。
Okay, so right now I'm going to have you walk through the student guide, the paper copy, which has the colored pictures on the top, and you're going to need a pen, please.
看讲义的话，就是这个讲义上面有图片，那你们需要有笔，必须要有笔。
Okay, so you are the student.
那现在你是学生，
I need you to put your name at the very top.
我需要你把你的名字写在最上面。
Because this is yours and you're the student for today.
因为你今天是学生，所以这是你的奖励。
And then my teaching assistant.
请助教帮忙。
Maybe a little too much time, it's annoying, but they have to pay their bills and all they can do. And then you can't listen to school.
All right, once you have your name on the top,
你把名字写上去之后，
each individual person. You can just put your name, just one name right now.
每一个人都要写。
Okay, so during a lesson, I would go over what's expected of my students, so I'm going to do that right now with you.
好，那在教学的过程中间呢，我会检查每一项内容。
So the first thing is the purpose or the goal, which I highlighted up here.
这第一项就是我们要达到的目的。
So as I go through this, I'm going to ask that you do a check mark.
那我一项一项，我读的这一项一项，我需要大家就在上面。我们读完的话，我需要你把它打勾。
And then I know exactly where my students are if I need to go back to talk to a student or answer a question.
这样我才知道你们的进度在哪里，我才能够对。
And then we're all following along and we're all on the same page.
那这样子的话，我们大家都是在同样的地方，我们在学习的是到达同样的，是同步的。
All right, so the purpose of the goal of this activity is to build a model of an energy efficient home.
那我们今天这个作业的目的呢，就是建造一个能够节能的家庭的模型。
The temperature inside the model should stay cool when subjected to heat or wind.
那也就是说，这个模型的内部呢，必须要能够保持它的冷，就不能够太热。
And the construction material should be made of recyclable materials as much as possible.
那建造的材料必须是再生的材料。
All right, the next thing I'm going to have you check off is learning objectives.
那第二项我要大家打勾的就是学习的重点。
So these are the objectives I went over at the beginning of the lesson today.
这些重点我在今天在讲课的时候就已经讲过。
So you're going to be designing and building a passive home. That's one of my objectives for you today.
所以第一个就是我们要设计一个被动式的家庭。
You will determine the appropriate materials to use.
然后你们要决定要用什么样的材料。
You're going to apply engineering principles.
你必须要使用工程的原则。
Adhere to a budget.
必须要控制你的预算。
And experience possibly an economic inequity.
那
Number
同时你
5.
要考虑到这个经济方面的考量。
So the next is engage in a design problem.
那接下来就是你要如果说你遇到任何设计上面的问题的时候，你要面对它。
So the problem is you will need to design and build a small scale model.
那这个就是你要设计以及建造一个小型的模型。
That insulates against temperature and wind.
那必须对这个气温还有风能够做到绝缘的目的。
Next is design constraints.
那接下来就是设计上的限制。
So this goes back to the question that I had with the person in the back.
那这个就是刚刚后面有同学提问，
Okay, so the size of the home.
这个模型的大小，
It does say 8 inches by 8 inches in perimeter,
这里说8寸乘8寸，
but that's going to be 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters.
那就
So
是20公分。
student assistants, can you help your groups change that 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters?
助教麻烦帮忙一下，让小组的成员能够知道是20公分乘20公分。
So So, depending on the scale that you get of your measuring tape,
大家尺上面的刻度。
it does say 8, but it's not 8 inches. It's 8 times 8. So that isn't the same as.
我的尺是台湾的尺，所以跟英尺是不太一样。所以虽然说它上面写8，可是不是英尺。
So that's why we're just going to use centimeters
所
today.
以我们今天就只会用公分。
All right, the next constraint.
接下来下一项限制。
One door, 2 windows.
一个门2个窗。
And you also need to be able to insert a thermometer.
而且必须能够让我们把温度计放进去。
Okay, so what your thermometer looks like is this. It's going to come in a box.
这个是我们的温度计，这个温度计是放在盒子里面。
And this is the probe
这是温度计的探针。
that has to sit in the center of your home in the middle of the main floor.
那这个探针将会放在你的这个模型的正中间的地上。
I also had a question, how tall can we build the home?
那有同学问问题说，那这个屋子可以多高？
1 story only.
只能盖1层楼。
Some of you are thinking, I'm just going to build a 1-story house and it's going to be really tall. And that's a great idea, but don't forget, you're going to get a budget, so you can only purchase so many materials.
有人想说，那我把房子盖得很高，虽然说只是1层楼，
So that will influence your building.
可是你要记得你的这个预算是一定的哈，你可能没有这个钱去买足够的材料。
Okay, the next design constraint.
接下来设计上的限制。
For insulation,
也就是绝缘体的部分，
you have to stay within 2 degrees of your initial room temperature once it's subjected to the heat or wind.
也就是你这个屋内的温度在接受我们的测试的时候，只能够它的差别只能够在2度之内。
And an extension activity, think in the back of your mind,
那接下来我们有一个这个加长型的这个挑战，
it will have to withstand extreme weather exposure
也就是当碰到极端气候的时候，
from flooding, earthquake, and typhoon winds as much as we can give it.
它必须能够在有洪水、有这个地震，还有这个台风的风吹的时候，还能够抵御，不会有问题。
So choose your materials very carefully.
所以请小心的选择你的要用的材料。
Okay, so my students always ask me, well, what's the grade? What am I going to get graded on? Okay,
那我的学生总是问我说，那你要怎么样打分数呢？
so you're graded on your sketching today,
那我们打分数是看你画出来的设计图的你的画。
the efficiency of your design,
那还有就是你的设计的效率功能，
how well your home is subjected to and passes an increase in temperature,
你设计出来的房子，在经过这个测试的结果好不好？
and how well you build your home.
还有你的房子盖得好不好？
I'm going to have you turn to the second page, please.
好，请大家翻到第2页。